For a full 12 months a year, the 28 teams of the National Football League prepare for one day in January, Super Bowl Sunday. Every phase of every team's operation is focused on a single goal: the World Championship of professional football. Over 1,200 men have performed in Super Bowls, a game that has become America's biggest one-day sporting event. One big play under America's microscope can follow a player for the rest of his life. The stakes are high, and the rewards are great. The winning team is awarded the Vince Lombardi Trophy, named in honor of the man who won the first 2 Super Bowls. More than 500 million people worldwide watch the Super Bowl on television, waiting for someone to emerge as a folk hero. It is the hottest pressure cooker in American sport, and each Super Bowl has its share of heroes and memorable plays. The Super Bowls are stories of both success and failure. Each has its moments when some of the game's greatest players prove they are human after all. This is a story of the men who have stood on the summit of professional football, and each year, their footprints are blown away, clearing a path for other teams with other stars to make their way to the peak.
All right. It is Monday. It is 7 o'clock, and that means it is time for the split decision. I was just sent a picture of my brother, my nephew, and my dog nephew, I suppose, staring intently, I'm guessing, at me on the television screen, watching the screen, waiting for me to start talking as I let that Super Bowl intro play. So let me just get that out of the way right now, and I'll say hello to my sister-in-law, Allison. Hello to my brother, Dan. Hello to Thumper the dog. And I don't know if this, I guess that's it. Is there anybody else I'm forgetting? Okay. Oh, yeah, Thomas. Hi, Thomas. How are you? Good to see you. So, yes, thank you to everybody who's huddled around their televisions watching me. Doesn't help my ratings any to be just 4 people in one, or 3 people and 1 dog in one market. I could use the Nielsen ratings across the course of a bunch of different TVs, but so be it. So we are here. We are still in August. We are still very much in the slow period of the year, although things are starting to pick up a little bit. We are actually less than 2 weeks away, believe it or not, from the start of the college football season, with that week 0, as they call it, which is always headlined by the game over in Ireland. I say always, and really that means like the last couple of years, but I know there are games as soon as August the 29th. The first game kicks off in Ireland. It's North Carolina against TCU. in the Aer Lingus Football Classic. And then there's a few other games that day, including San Jose State against number 14 USC. So there's a few games that day, and then a full slate the following weekend on Labor Day. And then we are into the NFL season shortly after that. I believe the NFL season kicks off 3 weeks from Wednesday. So 3 weeks and 2 days from tonight, we get going with the NFL. The NBA schedule came out this past week, and we'll talk about that as the New York Knickerbockers begin their defense of the world's heavyweight championship. And we'll be greeted with some tough matchups right out of the gate, as we kind of anticipated. And we will talk about all of that, and we will talk about baseball and the pennant races and things of that nature as we go through here a little bit. 845-416-8704 is the number to call in. It's weird. I'm in this room, and it's not weird that I'm in this room because A, it's in my apartment, and B, it's where I do all of my shows. But I was just here recording not 24 hours ago for a show that I will plug now, because some shows apparently have quicker turnaround times than Hello Old Sports does. We usually take some time to edit our episodes. But I don't mean take some time like take care. I mean take some time because it takes a while for us to actually do them. Whereas the podcast I was recording last night as a guest is up already, and that is the Historically Speaking Sports podcast, which is also our sister show on the Sports History Network. Friend of both this program and Hello Old Sports, Dana Auguster, and his co-host Charles Combs do a great show, and they had invited me on to talk about Southern Territory Wrestling in the 1970s and early 1980s. And I was more than happy to do that because I have a lot of I don't want to say knowledge about that time frame, but I have a lot of information about that time frame, and I don't have very many outlets for people who are willing to listen to me talk about it. So I jumped at the opportunity to be on the show, and we spent a good couple hours last night talking about primarily world-class championship wrestling out of Dallas, Texas, Mid-South wrestling out of Louisiana primarily, or home base in Louisiana, and Georgia championship wrestling based out of Atlanta, Georgia. So we spent a lot of time going over that. It was very fun, kind of a change of pace. Please give that a listen. Also listen to the Hello Old Sports podcast. We have an episode out on the final season of the ABA that I believe just came out today. So that was a lot of fun. We recently recorded an episode on the 1951 National League pennant race between the Giants and the Dodgers, leading up to the famous shot heard around the world. We got lots of good stuff coming up, so please give a listen to that as we go along. I guess as I'm looking at this, let's start with the NBA, because there's a couple of stories I want to talk about with the NBA. We'll open up. We'll talk about just the Knicks and the schedule. And it's been a little while since we've sort of visited with the champions of the world, the New York Knicks. And I feel like now is probably a good time to do so. They leaked the Christmas Day games. They didn't even leak them. They announced the Christmas Day games and the NBA Cup and all that stuff on Tuesday of last week. And then Thursday, the full schedules and the primetime game schedules came out. The Knicks also have, it says they just have 3 preseason games listed here. I wonder if they're going to end up playing more preseason games than that. I feel like teams usually play more than 3, but I see 3 listed here against Washington and against Toronto. And we'll talk about the Christmas Day games and some of the marquee games here in a minute, but just sort of, you knew the Knicks were going to max out in terms of they were going to be on primetime national television as many times as they are allowed to be, which I think is 40 or 39 or somewhere right around a halfway number of games you're allowed to play. Now, for a second you go, well, that's kind of like MSG really gets screwed. But unless the game is on NBC or ABC, I'm pretty sure they're allowed to simulcast the games. They're allowed to simulcast most games, not like the big marquee matchups, but most of the other ones, like when they're on ESPN, maybe even NBC, because I don't. That's a new package. And truthfully, the few times the Knicks were on NBC last year, I watched them on NBC just because of the whole NBA on NBC thing. But normally, if they're on, MSG, I'll watch that regardless of the national broadcast. But, you knew they'd be on at Christmas. The question was going to be when would they be on their normal sort of noon slot at Christmas that they've been playing for years now, or almost every year, regardless of whether they've been good, bad, terrible, otherwise, or would they move them to a later slot? They did end up sticking with them at noon. You knew they were going to play opening night. The question was, who would they play opening night? And we got our answer, and I guess upon further reflection, it makes sense, which is they play the Philadelphia 76ers. It's actually the second game of the season. It's the second overall game of the season, and I'll touch on that in a second. But the Knicks will begin with the Philadelphia 76ers on Tuesday, October the 20th on ring night. So, whatever that is, 9 weeks from tomorrow, believe it or not. Yeah, that would make sense because it'd be just over 2 months. 9 weeks from tomorrow, the Knicks will begin their defense of their championship. And, certainly we'll talk more about specifics as we get closer. Dana says, thanks for the plug for the show. I was off today, so I had time to put it all together. Thanks for coming on last night. We had a blast. I had a blast too. It was a lot of fun. It was, it was great, and I don't always listen to my podcasts back, the ones me and my brother do. Just something about listening to myself. Sometimes I get a little weird. I go in kind of waves with it, but this one, I'm definitely going to listen to the whole episode, probably sometime in the next couple of days. So thank you very much, Dane. I really, really enjoyed myself. And, I would imagine we'll be having you guys on, during our in memoriam, towards the end of the year. And, you guys are always one of the sessions we look the most forward to. So the Knicks, this is mostly about the schedule. It's a little early to do a full preview, but just sort of from an overall standpoint, they're going to return almost the entirety of the same team. Robinson gone to Boston. There was part of me that hoped that first game would be against Boston so that Mitch could be there for the ring and the tributes and the banner and all of that. But, they play them the second game of the year up in Boston. And I guess that'll be the question was, will they give him the ring up in Boston or will they wait? And it's interesting because the Knicks don't play the Celtics at home until March the 14th. As I look at it, they play the Celtics the second game of the season in Boston. Then they play them again on January 13th in Boston. And then they play them March 14th and April 4th at home. So I would imagine they will not wait until March and that they will give him his ring when they go up there on October the 23rd. But the Knicks will begin just sort of the first few games from the ebb and flow. The Knicks will begin at home against the Sixers. Obviously, the Sixers, the moves they made in the offseason, getting Jaylen Brown and then getting LeBron James to couple with a really good core of Tyrese Maxey, VJ Edgecombe, Joel Embiid for whatever he's worth at this point because of his health. But, the Sixers certainly got a tremendous amount better, and you would be hard pressed to argue that they should not be considered, at least on paper, as the favorites in the East, or at the very least the biggest threat to the Knicks in the East. The Celtics obviously had that insane year last year, but trading Jaylen Brown is a big piece of the puzzle, that will remain to be seen. So, while the Celtics certainly are a contender, I think most people would have them on that next tier down, with the caveat that you underestimate the Celtics at your own risk. And then, of course, Detroit was the number one seed in the East last year. And if you told me Detroit would be the number one seed in the East again next year, I wouldn't be blown away by it. If you told me Detroit's going to get to the NBA Finals, I would be very, very surprised. So, anyway, the Knicks are out of the gate with two big-time matchups. They're going to play the Sixers that Tuesday night, the 20th, and then they're going to play Boston Friday night, October 23rd, up in Boston. The next few games after that, they're going to play Orlando home. Then they're going to play Detroit at home on the 27th of October on NBC again. Then they go to Chicago. Then they're going to play Philadelphia again October 30th. And that's it for October. And then, some of the other early season marquee matchups. They're going to play Cleveland a couple of times in November. Obviously, Cleveland, Cleveland, the team they met in the Eastern Conference Finals. They're going to play Indiana a couple of times in November, including Indiana coming to Madison Square Garden the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and what I'd imagine will be a pretty raucous atmosphere because the Pacers are Halliburton will be back and all that. Game against Miami on December the 12th down in Florida, the Giannis Miami. God, they play the Cavaliers 4 times between mid-April or mid-November and mid-December, and then they're presumably done with the Cavaliers. And then on Christmas Day, you got the Spurs, and we'll go through the Christmas Day lineup here in a minute. Other big primetime games, Golden State, Boston, the Lakers, as you can imagine, in late January. Lots and lots of big-time games. The Martin Luther King Day game is against Minnesota, which is a little surprising at 5:00 on Martin Luther King Day, but and then certainly you should get later in the season. You have to see what the positioning is for the impact of the games. But the thing that kind of strikes me first about the early season Knicks schedule is I am glad they're playing the Sixers twice in October, because that first night, obviously that's going to be a really, really cool environment. It's going to be a really cool, night where they, I'm sure, have some kind of awesome tribute video, and they'll unveil the banner and they'll unveil the rings, and then, they'll all get their rings, and then, okay, now it's time to play a big game. And you can see and my brother said it still annoys me that the NFL crowded out the NBA on Christmas. And I do agree with that. I guess you just we'll go over the Christmas Day games in a few minutes, and we'll do the NFL Christmas Day games as well. I guess the thing you have to the one thing is all those NFL games are on Netflix, I believe. So people who were just randomly, and I know everybody's got smart TVs this day and age and stuff, but a lot of people will still, people will still flip on the NBA. It's not like the NBA gets totally closed out, but the NFL is just, the NFL is a monolith, and they, I think my brother's talked before about how they've said that they don't really view their competition as other sports. They view their competition as other entertainment properties, and, they consider themselves kind of a standalone entity in terms of, crowding out these other leagues and not being all that concerned about it. And that's annoying. Don't get me wrong. I find it to be annoying. And maybe this is me being a hypocrite, but it bothered me less because for years the NFL wouldn't play a Sunday night game the Sunday night that the World Series was on. For years, the World Series would be games 1 and 2, Wednesday and Thursday, off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I think, or whatever. There was one Sunday night game in the World Series, and the NFL that 1 week would actually not play a Sunday night game. And this is going back to, it was definitely during the Sunday Night Football on NBC era. So, probably as recently as 10 years ago, certainly longer ago than that, they would just do their Football Night in America show, and then there would be no game because they didn't go up against the World Series. And then they kind of realized, well, we're just going to kill the World Series, so we may as well go up against it. And even the NFL, to an extent, when it was okay if it's on Monday or Christmas is on Saturday or Sunday, when they started putting games on Tuesday and Wednesday, and not just one game but 2 games, and now I think there's 3 games. It is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that the NFL has to grab grab stuff from other sports like that. I do agree. And a couple of years ago, it was like they played on when I think Christmas is on a Friday this year, so like won't totally kill the rest. But the year they played on Wednesday, all those teams had to play on Wednesday the week before that too. So they had to like crisscross opponents the day before that or the week before that because you couldn't have, you had to keep the teams with the midweek schedules going for a couple of weeks. But we'll get back to that in a minute. But I think obviously that opening night for the Knicks, when they play the Sixers, the narrative is going to be set up for the Sixers to blow them out or to just beat them. And you go, oh, the Knicks celebrated last season's champion. Last season's champions opened the game, getting their rings and stuff. If the first game is any indication, the team on the other side is going to be celebrating at the end of the year, something like that. Now, I think obviously that's hyperbole. If the Knicks get run out of the gym in game one against the Sixers, I won't be pleased, but I'm not going to be apoplectic about it, at least not, for more than a day or two. I think objectively, the Knicks playing the Sixers twice in the Sixers' first 6 games and the Knicks' first 6 games. I don't know if it's the Sixers' first, is a really good thing. Because this is probably, none of those guys are going to have played together ever. And it's probably going to take them quite a while to gel. And that's assuming they're all healthy. So I don't mind catching them a couple of times early in the season while they're probably still trying to work things out. And especially that opening night when the Garden will be, you remember the Garden had the Knicks clinched all 4 of their playoff series on the road. The finals, they played 2 finals games there. One of them they lost. It was their only loss since the first round. And the other one was that insane, 29-point comeback. And then they won the championship on the road. And they won the Eastern Conference Finals on the road. And they won the Philly series on the road and the Atlanta series on the road. So the crowd, not that they were robbed of experiencing this team, but they are going to, to be insane that night. And they're probably going to be insane the whole year. But, I think we're going to have to, as the season goes on for the Knicks, kind of level set even beyond what we've done the last few years, where, the last couple of years, it's kind of like, all right, well, you want to be a top 3 seed or you want to avoid this team or you want to avoid that team. I think we're going to need to sort of enter a phase now of like, as long as they hold their own in these marquee games, and that's what they did this year. I was saying all year with the Knicks, I was saying, they've really played well against these elite Western Conference teams. I was going through the list and I was like, they beat the Spurs 2 out of 3 times. And they lost both to Oklahoma City, but at least one of them was really close. And then I would go, and they beat Denver both times and they split with Houston or whoever it was. And, they split with the Lakers, or they may have even beaten the Lakers twice. I don't remember. And, everybody in the Eastern Conference, with the exception of Detroit, they played really well against. And it was like, the goal wasn't, you need to like beat every top team in the league every time, but it's like, just as long as you hold your own. And, I think realistically, if the Knicks, we saw them go to a championship as a 3 seed. I think, if they're a top 4 seed, top 3 seed, that's just as good as being the top seed when it comes down to it. And it's, it's going to be easy to get fired up about some of these early season games, but, I'm just sort of already hearing I'm seeing the articles about, well, last season's over if suddenly they drop their first 2 games. And I'm not saying they're going to, but, I just can see those stories already being 90% written, that so many people can't wait to get back to the Knicks being frauds, that it'll just be rewritten to last year was a fluke as soon as they, struggle against good teams. And if they beat a bunch of good teams and lose to bad teams, that'll be spun as a struggle. And I guess these are good problems to have, but I just, figured I would mention all that. So let's look at some of the other NBA early season stuff, and then we'll look at the Christmas thing, like my brother said, and then we'll go from there. So the season gets going on the 20th, I believe, and somebody must have gotten some market research somewhere, because the NHL has done this the last 2 years, or at least the last year, and people really killed the NHL about it. And I was one of them. I didn't get what they were doing. That they played their first game at like 5:00 or 3:00 or something on a weekday. The NHL did. Now, what they did that was silly is that was the night that whatever team, Florida or whoever, got their rings, and the like celebration of the championship night, banner night, and they made them play at 4 or 5 o'clock on a random weekday in October. Well, now the NBA is doing that. So that big opening night triple header. Yeah, you have the Sixers and the Knicks at 7, and then you have a Western Conference Finals rematch at 9:30. You have Oklahoma City at the Spurs. But before that, at 3:00, you have Boston at Detroit. And I have looked everywhere I can find to make sure that Tuesday, October 20th is not some sort of civic holiday. And I believe that is my nephew's birthday. So that will be a big day for him. But it is not a holiday that is widely celebrated in anywhere that I can tell, certainly not in the city of Detroit, again, unless I'm totally wrong on this. So they're going to kick off their season at 3:00 on a Tuesday afternoon. And, my immediate reaction is to kill this. And I guess I still don't like it, but like, I guess the thinking behind it is, and I'm applying this retroactively to the NHL. I'm not saying, it was bad when the NHL did it, and now it's good when the NBA does it. I don't know that it's bad or good. It's just, I guess the thing they're thinking is, baseball opens the season in the middle of the day. Now, the immediate reaction is this is different. And I agree that it is, but I can't quite enunciate why, other than that's just how baseball's always done it. But like, baseball opens in the middle of this, on a weekday, usually in a lot crappier weather than October 20th, for mostly outdoor games on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Thursday or whatever it is. And that's not seen as sort of like weird or inappropriate. And I guess the other thing is, and again, I don't know that bosses and HR people all the world over would love this thought, but like, we exist in a world of streaming. We exist in a world of everybody's phones can bring up all of this stuff. We've, in the last just calendar year, we had the Winter Olympics, which took place largely during the day in the United States. We had the World Cup, which took place here in the United States, but, a lot of the games were on during the day. You think about the NCAA tournament, which plays during the day all the time. I guess what's the big deal? The concern can't be about getting, like, I'm sure Detroit will sell out. Like, if they only draw 5,000 people, then okay, we can say it was a mistake in terms of getting people to the arena. And other than that, it's a game on, on national TV on NBC. And I guess they're just banking on the idea that enough people will watch it in the afternoon to, make the rating and the streaming and, to make it. And I guess also they probably think, well, if it's on Peacock and people are at work and they have to watch it on Peacock, well, that boosts Peacock. And now that I think about it, I'm guessing that's exactly why they're doing it. But it's interesting. I'm inclined to kill it, but I don't really think that's fair. Other big early in the season games, you got Cleveland at Philadelphia on October the 22nd, Denver and Oklahoma City. We mentioned that Knicks Celtics game. Looking at like national TV games early in the week. But let's look at Christmas real quick, and we'll contrast it with the NFL on Christmas, and then we'll probably take our first break and go from there. All right. So I got the NBA up. Let me just also pull the NFL up on Christmas. NFL scores. And actually, I'm going to look at Thanksgiving for the NFL real quick because I know they've obviously always played on Thanksgiving, but I believe this year we're also getting a night before Thanksgiving game between the Packers and the Rams. To be honest, I don't hate that, but you got a night before Thanksgiving game, Packers, Rams at 8:00. You got your 3 Thanksgiving games, Bears, Lions, Eagles, Cowboys, Chiefs, Bills. Then you've got your Black Friday game between the Broncos and the Steelers at 3:00. So that's Thanksgiving. So 5 games between Wednesday and Friday on Thanksgiving. And then on Christmas, you've got Thursday. I think this is like regular Thursday night football on Christmas Eve. Texans, Eagles at 8:15. Then you have 3 games on Christmas Day on Friday. All of these are on Netflix. You have the Packers and the Bears at 1:00. You have the Bills and the Broncos at 4:30. And then you have the Rams and the Seahawks at 8:15. And that Rams-Seahawks game is, the game that most people have circled as sort of the 2 Super Bowl favorites. It was a rematch of the conference championship game last year. It's also the first time they play all season. They play twice in the last 3 weeks, which is another thing I hate. But the NFL is certainly loading their schedule up that night with the Packers and the Bears. And it's interesting if you look, Packers and Bears, the NBA teams involved there, Green Bay, so Milwaukee, who's not a lot of excitement about the Bucks immediately post Giannis, and then Chicago, the Bulls are perennially in the hunt for the 10 seed. Buffalo, where there's no NBA team. Denver is kind of the exception in here. The Seahawks, where there's no NBA team. The Rams, where obviously you do have the Lakers and the Clippers, but not in, especially hosting, not in teams that are likely to have super high profile games that day. But so that's the Christmas slate there. For the NBA, you've got San Antonio and the Knicks early. And like I said, this surprised me a little because I did think they'd put this on a little later. And maybe the thought is we start this game and we get the jump on the NFL because this is the game at noon. I think 3 years ago, I don't think the calculus would have been to have this game on at noon, a finals rematch. The NBA champions at home against the Western Conference champion. I think they would have made that a little later. So you have that at noon. Then at 2:30, you have Miami and Boston. Obviously the Giannis Heat going to Boston, who was the runner-up in the Giannis sweepstakes, and instead, ended up making some questionable moves that I still don't fully understand. Then at 5:00, you got the Sixers and the Lakers, and this is LeBron going back to LA. And this one doesn't do as much for me, to be honest. I mean, I know it's the Lakers. The Lakers are going to be on, it's Luka and everything, but I can't imagine they're going to actually push some sort of LeBron going back to LA thing. I don't know. I mean, yes, technically that is what's happening. I understand that, but I don't know. I don't see the narrative there of he's going against his former team. Maybe there's more interest in that than I'm giving it credit for. Oklahoma City at Minnesota at 8:00, and then the nightcap is Denver against Golden State. So, certainly a strong slate of matchups for the NBA on Christmas Day, but not unopposed. And I think, your big games, really, I think the first 2 games could be the most intriguing. Definitely the first 3. And then the later 2, Minnesota, Denver, and Golden State. I mean, they're all good games, but I think your finals rematch is sort of the headline on Christmas Day. So I guess with that, we'll put that aside. I could go over the NBA Cup bracket and everything, and the Knicks have a very, very tough bracket this year in the NBA Cup, and it is what it is. I as long as the Knicks don't get punished by playing and I guess it really doesn't matter. It is what it is, but they're going to play tough teams in that little bracket thing. So, hopefully they hold their own in that. And, I guess I can't totally dismiss like winning it because they won it and then won the championship. But, if they were to be eliminated, my brother says it is what it is, and what it is horseshit. Yeah, I don't like it. I don't want them to like kill themselves trying to win it. The narrative last year, though, you could again tell what was coming. The Knicks won it, and then they lost like their next game, and people were like, "Oh, they look gassed from the tournament," and I was like, that didn't end up being true. And I guess you could say they have a really tough bracket, but it's 4 teams they were going to play anyway. And actually, let me just so you know what I'm talking about. I'll pull up who the Knicks are playing in it. I did not realize they moved the my brother said they moved the Final Four to Indiana, I guess. I did not realize that. From Vegas. So yeah, I don't know how many people that's gonna make happy. But maybe they had their reasons, who knows. But I'm trying to pull this up and I keep getting the wrong thing. Although this accidentally pulled up the NBA playoff bracket from last year, which also didn't make me sad to see. So I'll take that. NBA Cup. Where the hell? Okay, here we go. The groups. So the Knicks group, so they'll play all of these teams in pool play, is Cleveland, Philadelphia, Miami, and Indiana. And that's a damn good group. When you consider the other 2 Eastern Conference groups are Detroit, Toronto, Orlando, Milwaukee, and Brooklyn. And then the other one is the Celtics, the Hawks, the Hornets, the Bulls, and the Wizards. So the Knicks are in a tough, but the thing is, those were all teams they were going to play anyway. So, and it doesn't add a game against those teams. Where I'll get mad is if somehow in like an out bracket game, it means they have to, or even in like a whatever, if it means they have to play a 5th game against the Celtics or, a 5th game against the 76ers or something like that. That's when it gets annoying because those games all count for seeding. So, enough said about that, I suppose. Let's do this. So let's take a break. We'll come back. I want to talk a little NFL preseason, talk about the Giants, talk about, a story that I thought was not a little overblown, was very overblown within the last few days. But we'll get into all that. But in the meantime, let's play a little more. I don't know why I got on this, but we'll play a little more of Super Sunday.
Because it was the only time.
And we will be right back on the Split Decision.
After the leagues agreed to merge in the summer of 1966, one of the details to be worked out were the details, the site, and so on for the championship game to be played between the 2 leagues. And we never knew what to call the game. My children each had a ball called a Super Ball, and my daughter was always talking about that ball. It was a highly concentrated rubber ball that you could bounce on concrete, and it would literally bounce over a house, very much like a golf ball would. And she was always talking about that Super Ball, and I think it was one of those spontaneous things. I just said, the last game, the final game, the Super Bowl.
On January 15th, 1967, the Kansas City Chiefs and Green Bay Packers met in the very first AFL-NFL championship game.
Everybody in the Chiefs organization felt an awareness that we were representing the 6-year history of the American Football League. We weren't just representing Kansas City or the Chiefs. We were representing the whole AFL. And I'm sure on the other side, the Packers felt the same way, too, for the NFL. But that first game was very significant because it was the only time that a team from the pure AFL played against the pure NFL.
This was to be the only championship ever televised by 2 networks. Maybe that's why so many of Hollywood's most famous faces were out to see and be seen. Perhaps it's also why this was the only Super Bowl that did not sell out. Those who did attend saw the underdog Chiefs score twice in the first half to stay close to the favored Packers, 14-10. But Kansas City coach Hank Stram was still worried about pregame statements made by Chiefs cornerback Fred Williamson.
if we had any psychological advantage going against the Packers in Super Bowl I, we couldn't do any talking. We have to be quiet. And here's Fred expounding on what he was and was going to do to the Packers, and how he was going to level them.
The man known as the Hammer had boasted all week that he would come down on Green Bay receivers Carroll Dale and Boyd Dowler.
Graham quietly comes over to me and says, that kind of attitude we can't have here. You can't be that kind of braggadocio guy that you're going to alert the Packers that we're here. And I'm thinking, they know we're here.
All right, back here live on the Split Decision on Facebook or on YouTube live. It is 7:43 here on the East Coast in Shelton, Connecticut. It was mostly cloudy today, but it seems like the sun may be coming out a little just in time for it to set. You can tell we're getting into the latter part of August and the very latter part of the summer because, it is certainly, the days of still some daylight at 9 o'clock are past us at this point. My brother made a point in that clip I just had on talking about Super Bowl I, and he said, I just realized a year ago what they meant by pure AFL versus pure NFL. And the reason for that is starting after the leagues basically agreed to merge, they, starting with the 67 season, had a common draft. So even though they were still technically two separate leagues, they had already started to integrate. Wrong choice of words. We're talking about sports. They were starting to merge in terms of knowing the merger was happening. They weren't going to have each team. They weren't going to have a guy get drafted by an NFL team and an AFL team and have a bidding war over them when it was all going to be one league in 3 years anyway. So they started doing the draft where they all drafted players from, they all drafted together, like, pick one would be the Dolphins and then pick two would be the Steelers and whatever, going up that way as opposed to two separate drafts and then bidding wars for guys. So yeah, that was what they meant by the pure AFL versus the pure NFL. So I wanted to get into some stuff with football. The Giants played their first preseason game. And also, like, there's been a million Hall of Fames lately. I feel like I know we talked about baseball. I don't know if we talked about who got into the Football Hall of Fame, and then the Basketball Hall of Fame did theirs last week, so we should maybe talk about that. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about. The Giants played their first preseason game the other day, and I watched it. I didn't watch it live. I kind of watched it in bits and pieces. And, preseason is, I guess, necessary, although, people have often made the point of, like, if it was so necessary, why don't college teams play preseason games? And certainly if it was all about getting tuned up for the season and had no revenue implications at all, certainly they wouldn't charge people to go as part of their season ticket packages, knowing full well that they don't want the damn preseason tickets. They wouldn't, if it was that important for everybody to be ready for the season, the star players would play, even if they weren't, fully healthy players wouldn't get scratched to not play. And certainly as the years have gone on, the thing that annoys me, and this always annoyed me going back to Tom Coughlin, and I know to some degree the coaches say this, and the coaches all say it, and they may even believe it to a degree, but, like, as fans, we are under no obligation to pretend it's important that they win these games. Like, the number of times, like, Coughlin used to always talk about how important it was to win preseason games. And I've always said, like, yeah, you probably don't want to go 0-4 and lose now there's only 3, but, like, you probably don't want to go 0-4 and lose every game 30-0. Like, yeah, that probably does not bode, that's probably not a good omen. But for years, like, I remember when Coughlin first came in and everybody was, it's really important. It's really important that they go 4-0. They're like, and the one year they went 4-0 and everybody got all excited. I think it was 2006, and then they went 8-8. And then the next year they were 1-3 or 2-2 when they won the Super Bowl. Like, I don't doubt that with 2 minutes left in the game, the guys are, trying to win the game. Like the Giants lost the other day 13-10, and Minnesota had the ball up 3 late in the game. And, if the Giants really wanted to just get the game over and didn't care at all about winning, they wouldn't have tried to use their timeouts, but obviously they did use their timeouts. Like, I don't doubt they tried to win, but like this idea that like, it's concerning they didn't win. No, it's not. Especially, well, no, none of them. I was going to say, especially not the first one, but none of them. So, there was some, as always, there was some bright spots. There was some whatever spots. I thought it was pretty nice how like Beckham got such a huge ovation when he came into the game. I don't know what Odell Beckham's impact on the Giants is going to be this year. My guess is very minimal. If you told me he's going to make it into November still on the roster, like healthy, I would probably take that bet that would not be taking place. But and this happened pretty soon after we started doing the show, so there is a record of me talking about how bad this was, although it may have been back when we were still on WPWL. I think after, he came in and he was, obviously really immature, but he was still a really good player. And most of his antics while he was a Giant, I think, were somewhat overblown. The game against Carolina, when he kept committing the personal fouls, that was bad. And Coughlin should have gotten him out of the game. But he also was the only good thing they had going those last couple of years of the Coughlin era and into the McAdoo era. I don't remember exactly when they traded him. And then they, I think a lot of fans were thinking about what had happened with Plexico Burress and where he shot himself in the leg, and it, derailed the 2008 Giants season when they had a chance to repeat as Super Bowl champions. And as soon as Beckham started to act up, even though he did nothing that was ever on the level of what Plexico Burress did, they're like, get rid of him. It's not worth the headache. It's not worth the headache. And okay, they traded him for a couple of draft picks that I don't think turned out to be anything. And, then we saw years and years of guys who were, either, players that were never anywhere on his level, guys who caused more trouble than he did while never being the same level of player. And I'm spacing on his name right now, and I'm annoyed about that. Kadarius Toney is who I'm thinking of. And Beckham went on to have a really good NFL career. He won a Super Bowl with the Rams and probably would have been the MVP of that Super Bowl had he not gotten hurt. Ended up maybe not with the career we thought he would have after a couple of years, but ended up with a good NFL career. And, the fact that he's out there with the Giants now, and I would guess will make the team, but I can't see a scenario where he's healthy for very long. But like, it was nice to see him get some, get some accolades from the fans at the beginning of the game. So, or at the beginning of when he came into the game. So sort of the big story for the Giants, to the extent that there was a big story, was in the first half, Jackson Dart took a big unprotected hit. He was, I think it might have been the end of the first quarter, but he was basically, Tyrone Tracy didn't block who he was supposed to block, and a guy came in on a free run and hit Dart hard, and Dart went down, and was down for, a couple of seconds, decently long enough, and they take him out, and, he ends up being okay. Winston came in. That was the end of the series, I believe. Winston came in for a couple of plays, and then Dart came back in, threw a touchdown, and ended up being fine. And that is what it is. I mean, look, do you want your quarterback taking unimpeded free hits in preseason? No. I didn't like people trying to lump that in with like the hits he took last year that were the fault of him not getting out of bounds or not sliding, or in some cases, keeping the ball too long or whatever. This one could in no way be dressed up as his fault, unless the only way it would have been his fault, and I've seen no indication of this, is if he messed up with assigning the protection at the line. And even then, that wouldn't have been his fault in the sense of, taking an unnecessary hit. It would have been his fault mentally, but doesn't seem like that was the case. The sort of, and I got to be honest, hearing that this became a controversy today, I'm like, this is an August controversy. There's not much else to talk about controversy. But I'm looking for the exact quote, but he said they take him in. So he gets hit in the middle of the chest, and he ends up going they send him into the tent. And I'm going to play his audio when this ad finishes playing, just because I haven't found a transcript of it yet, but it's like 20 seconds in the audio. So basically, he gets hit. He goes to the ground. His head doesn't snap back or anything. His head doesn't visibly hit the turf. I think they said the reason he was on the ground for a beat there was because he got the wind temporarily knocked out of him. But as he comes off the field, they send him into the tent. And that was the reason that Winston was out there at the beginning of the next drive. And we're getting Dart's comments up here, so let me just unmute it.
Giants fans cringing. Yeah, against those Viking squad. A not so great moment. Pass protection, a little bit of a problem here. Dart taking a massive hit, goes to the blue tent, was able to come back through a beautiful touchdown pass to the rookie Malachi Fields. But Jackson asked about the hit when the game was over.
As far as the blue tent, I really respect the rules and the thought behind, NFL has of keeping players healthy and reviewing things. But at the same time, I'm still puzzled by it just feeling like every time that I get hit, I just find my way in there.
So that became a little bit of a flashpoint today on television because some people seemed to be ready to jump on him for that. And I want to read Harbaugh's quote because I think Harbaugh played it exactly correctly. He said, "I'm sure it's frustrating. I guess maybe he got the wind knocked out of him a little bit, but I'm not going to be critical of the league or whoever's doing that upstairs. They do their job and they want to protect the players. I'm sure history or whatever they might remember, but maybe that comes into play. I don't know if there's a similar situation, another quarterback who would have been called in the 10 or not. There's no way for us to know that, so nothing we can worry about." So, I think a lot of people, and look, let's address the elephant in the room. Jackson Dart made himself a high-profile media target. He did that to himself this offseason. I understand he's the quarterback of the New York Giants. He, played in kind of a flashy, style last year and seems to be kind of a brash a brash guy, and is good, was going to draw some attention anyway, for that. When you to hell with it, I'm not going to dance. When you appear on stage with Donald Trump, you are inviting yourself to become and when Donald Trump then continues to mention you as, fawning over your looks and what can only be described as bizarre behavior from an ostensibly straight human being. When he basically he made himself into a lightning rod. So I have no sympathy for him in that regard. And I'm not even really predisposed to like Jackson Dart that much, to be honest. I think he's gotten a lot of mileage out of a couple of pretty good games when he came in and looked a lot better than Russell Wilson did. I'm hoping he ends up being a good quarterback for the Giants. And I think year one was certainly promising, but I think people who are certain he's a franchise quarterback are not basing that on much. But we'll come back to that at some point down the line. I don't really see I guess if you really want to look at it as a critical eye and say he shouldn't be saying anything about the health procedures that are there in place to protect him, okay, but he really didn't shoot his mouth off. Like, he honestly spoke with a level of sort of even-handedness and thoughtfulness that I didn't really know he would in talking about something like that, where he seemed like a guy who's gone through some media training about how to address things. And he basically said, yeah, hey, I respect what those guys are there to do, but it seems like I'm getting sent to the tent a lot. And, especially on a hit, like, he didn't say this, but he's basically saying, like, I'm not really sure why they're constantly sending me to the tent on some of these hits, because I keep being okay. So, like, I get that. And I think Harbaugh's answer to that was right. But I really can't even, like, Dart didn't throw anybody under the bus. I think he probably knew what he was doing, raising the issue. To me, I read that as like when coaches complain about foul discrepancies and stuff. They know they can't do anything about it now, but they're hoping to sort of plant it in somebody's mind about that in the future. And I get this is a delicate situation, because the reason there are independent neurologists and the blue tent is because teams and players can't be counted on to police themselves on this, because you're not going to say, oh, my quarterback seems a little woozy, or even just, I didn't like the way he fell, we're going to pull him for evaluation, and he potentially may miss some plays while he's being evaluated, and then he's coming out of the game for the rest of the game if he's got a concussion. Like, you can't count on teams or even team doctors to do that. So I think the independent neurologist thing is important. But I also, and players, unfortunately have a track record of hiding this stuff. And that unfortunately is not good either. And I think, honestly, most of the hits Dart took last year where he was running and there was some contact to the head, they were right to send him to the 10, even though I think only once did he have an actual concussion, but they were right to evaluate him. This one the other day was a little bit, there wasn't much there because it was a hit to the midsection. He went down, his head didn't snap off the turf. But I think it's sort of like when they talk about roughing the passer. And it's like, they don't necessarily go by exactly what they saw. They go by what it looked like. So if a defensive back hits a quarterback really hard, more often than not, now they're going to throw roughing the passer just because of the way it looks. And if you call it and it wasn't roughing, people just go, oh, the league is soft these days. If you don't call it and it was roughing, they blame the ref specifically. And I think that's what this was we've seen videos of quarterbacks taking hits and making the sort of movement with their hand or with their head that guys do after concussions and them not being taken out of the game. So I think the refs are going to say, well, that quarterback took a full speed hit where he wasn't really encumbered by a blocker, and the quarterback took, a few seconds to get up. We're going to send him to the 10. And I think it's a reasonable thing to do, but I really don't think Jackson Dart responded unreasonably or like a meathead or anything there. And then you had guys like Mike Florio today, who basically is carries water for the league at every turn. He said, it's there for his protection. It's there for his safety. This is what disappoints me about this. And this is where I think John Harbaugh, Joe Shane, somebody needs to say, look, you shouldn't be talking like this. This mechanism is there for your safety, Jackson. It's not there to hassle you. It's a preseason game. Took a hit. It looked like your head hit the turf. They're there to make sure okay. I don't think complaining about it is going to make it any better. I think, if anything, it's going to make the spotters more sensitive. So, I guess Florio's not totally out of bounds there. Maureen was saying that she had ESPN on after I left this morning, and one of the guys was saying, like, he needs to apologize to the team for speaking out like that. And I just don't think that matches what actually happened. Carl Banks actually said, let's see what he said. There's a two-time Super Bowl champion Carl Banks explains why there's a justifiable bias for sending Dart to the blue tent, blah, blah, blah. So I guess this is what he said. There is a justifiable blue tint bias. And the thing is that if I had to coach Jackson Dart on, like, if let's say I was a Hollywood stuntman coach, every hit doesn't have to look like you're dead. That's part of why they do that. Like every time he takes a hit, he throws his arms out like he's about to make a snow angel, and he just stays there. I was like, sometimes you got to move around a little bit to convince them that it ain't, you're not, knocked out. But he says sometimes he lays there sometimes, and I'm like, you gotta kind of convince them that it ain't what they suspect it is. And that there's another quarterback I used to talk about. And then he starts talking about Ron Jaworski. And again, I don't want guys to hide injuries, but I think, if you take a big hit and you're laying on the ground, they're probably going to think you're injured. So, anyway, I just thought that was worth talking about. So the Giants themselves, it was okay. They lost 13-10. Brandon Allen, the third string quarterback for the Giants, was horrendous. He threw 2 interceptions, bad interceptions. The one thing I get a little tired of is people who go like, well, who cares what the third string quarterback do? If you need your third string quarterback, you're in trouble anyway. I don't know that I believe that, because my favorite is the Giants are only going to carry 2 quarterbacks anyway. First of all, if they only carry 2 quarterbacks with Jackson Dart's injury history, I really don't know what they're thinking. Because if they carry 2 quarterbacks and Jackson Dart gets hurt, okay, now you have Jameis Winston, and now you have to sign another quarterback anyway. So I think they would be foolish to not carry 3 quarterbacks. But even if they do, you should still want everybody on your team to be as good as they can be. And I don't believe that performance from Brandon Allen there was worthy of an NFL roster spot, even if it is as a third string quarterback. I won't go crazy about the rest of the preseason, the rest of the Giant preseason game. I just figured it was, it was certainly worth mentioning. So I just wanted to get into that, because some of the talking about it frustrated me a little bit, that people were kind of jumping to immediately criticize Dart as like, well, he went railing against the NFL's concussion protocol. And that's really not what happened. It was very mild criticism. And even if you don't agree with it, I really don't think he stepped totally, like, if he had gone up there and screamed, this is started talking about, this is a men's game, and I can't be worried, like, I need to be a competitor out there, and the doctors shouldn't be telling me what I should do, like, then okay, yeah, then kill him for that. But he prefaced it pretty strongly with respecting the doctors, and even if it's bullshit, even if he's just saying that because he's been told to say it, it's what you're supposed to say. And then just kind of said, yeah, I've been a little puzzled a few times, and maybe at the least, maybe he gets something from the NFL where they reach out to him and say, here's exactly what these guys are looking for. I don't know that they'll be that specific, because then you're kind of teaching guys to hide it. But, anyway, I just don't think that was that big of a deal, or that out of bounds from a guy I'm probably not going to defend too much when it comes to comments and stuff. But I think in this instance, there really wasn't anything bad about it. So a little bit after 8 o'clock, let's take our second break. We'll come back. We'll get into some baseball, talk a little about the Basketball Hall of Fame. Maybe we'll talk about this Steve Ballmer thing with the Clippers, because it's fascinating. But in the meantime,
if I tell you that Boyd Dial is not going to catch a pass, it's because I believe it. If I tell you Garrett Dale is going to be spending half the game on his behind, it's because I believe it. As a matter of fact, the first fake Boyd Dial gave me, they carried him off the field after that. He caught one pass, was slanting over the middle, and I said, this is just what I'm looking for. There's a guy 6'7", 6'8", coming across on a slant in on the hammer. And I hit him with everything that I had, and they took him off the field because the shoulder was no longer normal. And now if they want to blame the loss of the game on me, they can blame it on this particular incident, because of the fact that after that, Max McGee came in. And it takes him an hour and 25 minutes to run a 100-yard dash. He goes over on the other side of the field, and I look up, he's catching 2 slant-in passes for 2 touchdowns.
As damaging as the McGee scores were, it was Willie Wood's third quarter interception that devastated the Chiefs.
And it is intercepted with the left hand. That's Willie Wood who picked it off. He may go. He was laying back waiting for that one.
After Wood brought the ball deep into Kansas City territory, the legendary Packer sweep took center stage.
Kansas City 14. To Jim Taylor on a power sweep, cutting back at the 10. Taylor is in for the touchdown.
The route was on, but the Packers still had some unfinished business left with the hammer.
Well, I had set myself up because I was the Pied Piper. The Green Bay Packers are going to get the hammer. Donnie Anderson came around, and his knee hit me right on the smack right here in the forehead, and I went down. And I was a little woozy.
The hammer! The hammer! Hey, you know who got hurt? The hammer. The hammer! They nailed the hammer. Hey, Slap, the hammer got it! Really?
I'm the clown of the football field now because I'm out. They got the hammer. They said, come on, get up. And I refused to get up. I'm embarrassed. They came and they dragged me off the field and dumped me on the sidelines. When they dumped me, I jumped up and I waved at my fans to let them know I was all right.
The Hammer was conscious enough to read the final score. Packers 35, Chiefs 10. An important victory for the NFL and Green Bay coach Vince Lombardi. Vince would bring his Titans back the following year to Miami's Orange Bowl for their second straight AFL-NFL championship. This time, the opposition was the Oakland Raiders, who simply could not stop this team of Green Bay legends. The Raiders did themselves no favors by committing a wide variety of foul-ups and blunders. The Silver and Black have played some of the best postseason games in football history, but this was certainly not one of them. Green Bay bolted to a 16-7 second quarter lead, with the key play coming on a 62-yard touchdown pass from game MVP Bart Starr to a now very healthy Boyd Dowler. But as the Packers went to the locker room at halftime, something besides simply the game's outcome weighed heavily on their minds.
We had all been pretty aware of the fact that Coach Lombardi was thinking very, very seriously about retirement. And while many of us cuss him or call him names or a number of things, it's something like you might do with your family. You can call your brother something, but don't let anybody else call him the same thing. This is the same way with Mr. Lombardi. We can cuss him, but don't let anybody else holler at him. And we all felt that this was going to be his last game. And I said to the fellas, I said, look, we got 30 more minutes this year. I said, let's give it to the old man. Let's play the last 30 for the old man. That's about all I said.
The message was heard loud and clear. Number 26, cornerback Herb Adderley, keyed a second-half onslaught that buried the Raiders 33-14 and gave Lombardi a victory in the last game he ever coached for the Packers. The World Championship award he earned now bears the name, the Vince Lombardi Trophy, in his memory.
All right, back here live on the Split Decision on YouTube Live. It's about 10 after 8 on Monday, August the 17th. Just as a reminder, no show next week, Monday the 24th, and then we'll be back on the 31st and back for the foreseeable future. From that point on, we'll be on the eve. Well, college football will have already started. We'll be on the eve of the first real big week of college football, and then we'll be right into the NFL season and the stretch run in baseball, and away we go. So probably just a couple more weeks of these slow-ish shows, although I'm enjoying tonight. Last week was a bit of a slog, if I'm being honest, but I'm enjoying this tonight. But I'll be excited when things pick back up again a little bit. I did want to get to some baseball in a little while, but a couple of things I got to talk about. The NBA is obviously closing ranks and protecting the Clippers in this whole Steve Ballmer thing and Kawhi Leonard. For anybody who doesn't know, Pablo Torre, who turned into like a brilliant investigative journalist after being kind of a guy on the Dan Le Batard show and Around the Horn and stuff like that. That was kind of a irreverent, goofy kind of guy, and still is, but does this really good investigative show called Pablo Torre Finds Out. Ran an expose bit last year on Kawhi Leonard and Steve Ballmer that basically showed he had gotten it. The original thing was that he'd gotten a deal with a company called Aspiration, which was a defunct green banking company. And then it moved on to a few other companies, including Daktronics, the company that does the scoreboards, including for the Clippers. And basically the idea was that he was given sponsorship deals and paid and then never asked to do anything, never being given any kind of, never had to do any sort of like press work or billboards or commercials or in any way do any kind of sponsorship thing. You know, this sounds like something out of a prior era of college sports, which where, you know, guys were getting no-show jobs or something like that so they could funnel money to them. Now, you might ask yourself, well, you know, what's a guy who's a professional athlete? You know, there's no issues involved in that. It seems like they've painted a pretty clear picture. I forget, there was something with the board of Aspirant that clearly had direct links to the Clippers ownership, that they're clearly using these the accusation that seems pretty well founded to me is that they're using these endorsement deals where he doesn't actually have to do anything to give him more money to circumvent the salary cap in the NBA, and essentially, you know, trying to give him more money than he would be allowed to get otherwise, or that would, you know, that would cause the Clippers salary cap problems by steering him to fake endorsers. And you thought the NBA might actually come down on an owner for this. It says now, and again, if the other owners were, you know, the reason I thought there might be some ramifications here is that the other owners might be pissed about this because there's sort of a shell game all along about what they can afford to pay these guys. And if the Clippers are giving Kawhi Leonard tens of millions or hundreds of millions more dollars than they supposedly can afford to give him, then that kind of blows their whole game out of the water. But it says the NBA this is an article from earlier today, Don Von Natta and Baxter Holmes and Ramona Shelburne on ESPN. The NBA has found no evidence showing LA Clippers owner Steve Ballmer funneled money through team sponsors to pay Kawhi Leonard in order to circumvent the salary cap, according to 3 people with knowledge of the discussions. Instead, the NBA is focused on whether the team's introduction of Leonard to team sponsors constitutes a violation of the league's rules prohibiting salary cap circumvention, 2 of the sources said. The league is examining whether the Clippers are guilty of failure to supervise employees, though it's unclear what specific rule the team would have violated or what the penalties would be. The 11-month investigation, blah, 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 blah. Sources said the league presented no evidence that Ballmer funneled money to Leonard. The league presented initial findings, et cetera, et cetera. NBA spokesman Mike Bass did not respond to multiple requests for comment. ESPN regarding the LA Clippers investigation, for which the NBA declined to cooperate, contains numerous and significant inaccuracies. The results of this matter will be made clear once the investigation is concluded. Statement also said the team did not negotiate or dictate the terms of Leonard's endorsement deals. The fact that a player has an endorsement relationship with a company that also does business with his team is not evidence of salary cap circumvention. The NBA's investigation began after a September 2025 report from podcaster Pablo Torre that cited internal documents showing Ballmer invested $50 million in Aspiration through his personal LLC in September of 21. That month, the Clippers also signed a $300 million deal with Aspiration, making the company the first founding partner of the Intuit Dome. Then in April of 2022, Aspiration signed a $28 million endorsement deal with Leonard. An unnamed employee who purportedly worked for the banking company told Torrey that Leonard's sponsorship deal was to circumvent the salary cap, and the report characterized the contract as a no-show job. Ballmer made an additional $10 million investment in Aspiration on March 9th, 2023. The league's investigation examined deals with companies including Daktronics and Boingo Wireless, a wireless provider for the Intuit Dome. Sources familiar with the inquiry said earlier this month, Torrey reported that Leonard had a previously undisclosed sponsorship agreement allegedly worth millions with Daktronics, the South Dakota-based company that designed the Clippers video board and the Intuit Dome. Like Aspiration, there's no evidence that Ballmer funneled money through these companies, and in recent discussions, the league has focused on those companies only in the context of the Clippers introducing them to Leonard and his representative. Blah, blah, blah. The allegations arose. Adam Silver said it's up to the NBA to prove wrong. Blah, 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 blah. So it certainly seems to me like the NBA is closing ranks to protect Steve Ballmer and the Clippers. And they are going to let Kawhi Leonard take the fall for this. My guess is that Kawhi Leonard is going to get some sort of, Kawhi Leonard is a free agent and signed a deal or was about to sign a deal to go back to Toronto, where he spent that 1 year and won a championship, and is now in kind of a professional limbo because as he was about to sign the deal, the NBA made it clear that, like, hey, you need to acknowledge that any deal you sign or it might have been a trade, any trade you make here is not like, basically, if you sign this now, whatever happens with the punishment is your problem. Like, you can't get out of this deal if he gets suspended or, whatever. So part of me thinks the NBA is closing ranks and gonna let Kawhi Leonard take the fall for it. But then I think, the players union probably wouldn't put up with that and would probably prolong this fight. So what it seems like to me now is that they're going to essentially, and I'm going to answer that question in a minute or speculate on that question in a minute. Why aren't other owners furious about this Kawhi thing? My guess is they're going to basically say, we found some improprieties and Kawhi Leonard's going to be fined $50,000 or whatever, and the Clippers are going to be fined $1 million, and we're going to clarify the rules on sponsorships and blah, 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 blah. And nobody's going to get any real punishment, and they're going to move on. The question is, why aren't other owners furious about this Kawhi thing? And like I said, I can come up with a number of reasons they should be, like on the surface. One is just that the guy's paying let's assume for the moment that this is true. And there doesn't seem to be any argument that he's got sponsorship deals to not do anything. So if we sort of suss this out, like, nobody's denying he's got these sponsorship deals. And nobody seems to be saying he was doing actual sponsorship work for our scoreboard company or our green energy company, famously, endorsed and appear in commercials from, with NBA players, especially one as famously outgoing and smooth as Kawhi Leonard. You would think on the surface level, NBA owners who are trying to, put the best basketball team together would be furious that they're all playing by the rules. And this guy is clearly the most benign reading of this is that on its own, sponsors of the Clippers, including one that got a $35 million investment from Steve Ballmer, sponsors of the Clippers on their own decided to pay the Clippers top player for endorsement deals without needing to without needing to do any work. So if the Clippers truly had nothing to do with it, this was sponsors trying to help the Clippers, which in and of itself isn't great. It's the old booster argument for, it's the old booster argument for college sports from the 80s. Well, it's the boosters. And it's like, even if you're telling the truth, it's not okay, but we also know that that's a convenient excuse. The reading to anybody who's got a brain is that at the very least, this was done in coordination with the Clippers, even if Steve Ballmer wasn't funneling the money directly himself to these people to then remit payments to, it was like he was wiring Daktronics $40 million and they were turning around and cutting a check to Kawhi Leonard for $36 million. Like, they were obviously going to be a little smarter about it than that. So, assuming something went on in coordination with the Clippers ownership, the owners just on the surface should be mad that, he's violating the rules and he's got an unfair advantage when it comes to signing players. And we want to know if this has happened again. We see a proof that it happened with Kawhi Leonard. Where's, he should be, every free agent signing they've made and every endorsement deal should be investigated by the league to see if, this has happened a bunch, and Ballmer should be suspended by the league pending the results of the investigation. That's sort of the surface level, we're trying to compete to win a championship argument. Like I said, the slightly more nefarious but also accurate argument would be this is really going to hurt us in CBA negotiations because we're saying the absolute max we can afford to pay a player is X $100 million over however many years. And here you are giving him $100 million more. The players union response is going to be, well, instead of having to go through this shell company middleman thing, just increase the value of a max contract or increase the value of the salary cap. So they would be mad about that too. And I'm sure there are some that are mad behind the scenes, but NBA owners, can get in front of microphones if they want and criticize Steve Ballmer. I think there's two ways to look at it. One is that they're all doing something like this to an extent, or enough of them are doing something like this to an extent that they can't be publicly seen to be criticizing him over it because he probably knows what they're doing or what they're up to. I think that's part of it. And I think another part of it is just honestly that rich assholes like this, billionaires, I think they see it as disloyal to one of their own come and speak out about some sort of financial impropriety like this. Like I think even if they're not doing it, most of them admire him for trying it, would be my guess. So I have no idea. That's all blind speculation, but like you would think that something that I guess the other argument you might have is that it didn't really work in terms of the Clippers never made a finals. They never seriously contended when Kawhi Leonard was there. He's gone now. Had this been a situation like this is how the Warriors were able to land Kevin Durant, or, this is what Oklahoma City did to put that team together and win a championship, I think you might see more owners being outraged over it. But I get the sense that this is a group that doesn't really want this to keep getting investigated and keep having revelations come out, because you have a feeling the Clippers didn't invent this. And if they did, that it's not an unheard of thing that nobody else has tried in a slightly different way. Like, if people forget, that's one of the things they got the Bounty Gate guys on. The Saints thing with the defensive coaches and, given the money for injuring players. And obviously it came at a time when people were starting to get really serious about head injuries, and, the whole thing seemed kind of, was disgusting in that regard. One of the reasons they got all those guys on it was they were circumventing the salary cap, was that they were giving players extra money that wasn't, counting against the salary cap sort of unofficially. Now, you were talking a few hundred or maybe a few $1,000s, and in the grand scheme of what it would cost, what NFL players make, that wasn't really the big issue, but it was the thing they had the surest case on, is that this is unreported salary you're giving to these players, or bonuses, or whatever you want to call it. And so that's why now, like, forget about even the injury thing. NFL teams are not allowed to do that, where they go, hey, I'll give you $100 every time you catch a touchdown, or $500 or whatever it is, like, because the same thing. You're technically including stuff that should count as salary, but is being done outside of that. So that's part of it. It's like how all these mobsters always get busted for income tax evasion instead of murder. It's because the income tax evasion is the easiest thing to prove. So, more could come out with that. It'll be interesting. There's obviously a lot going on with the ownership of the basketball teams in Los Angeles now. And this Lakers one is really interesting because, it reminds me, we did that podcast with Yaron Weitzman a few months ago about the LeBron Lakers. And this was before he left Los Angeles. But, we talked about how weird it was that the Buss family, Jeannie Buss, who took over the team from her dad and, sort of seemed set up to be the owner of the team for a very, very long time. And suddenly she had ditched the team and ditched the majority stake in the team. And we were trying to kind of speculate on why now. Why would they do this? Sold it to a guy named Mark Walter, who then promptly, after 1 year of owning the team, has turned around and sold the team to a group. I believe it's Josh Kushner, Jared Kushner's brother, I believe. And it says here Bob Iger. I don't know if he was part of the bigger sale. I'd have to look, but basically turns around and immediately unloads the team to this group after a year. And some of that stinks to high heaven because he's apparently under investigation, for all sorts of financial things. And this is seen as possibly a bribe to the highest levels of the country. And I guess the Buss siblings voted to sell their remaining percentage of the team. And now Jeannie Buss is pushing back on that. It says Los Angeles Lakers governor Jeannie Buss is contesting this is from Ramona Shelburne, contesting her siblings' vote to sell the family's remaining 17.8% share of the Lakers, according to a letter from her obtained by ESPN. The Buss family in a statement said earlier Monday they had voted to sell their remaining shares to Josh Kushner and Bob Iger at the same $12.5 billion valuation that Mark Walter agreed to last week. They believe they had the right to sell based on a tag-along provision that had been included in the previous sale. Sources told ESPN the provision gave the family rights to tag along on any sale and valuation that Walter secured his shares. Buss was to remain the team's controlling owner through 2030. Iger told the California Post last week that he intended to honor that agreement, but added, if something changes, something changes. Should the sale of the family stake go through, Jeannie Buss would no longer have the needed ownership percentage to remain governor of the team. Spokesman for Kushner and Iger declined to comment. So you could have some real interesting times in Los Angeles area basketball ownership issues. I kind of wonder if the Lakers now are going to be entering a period of, like we saw with the Dodgers for a while with the McCourts, where, the longtime family ownership leaves, and it was Peter O'Malley after Walter O'Malley. And then, I think Rupert Murdoch owned him for a little while, and then it became this whole thing with the McCourts and, just a whole disaster. And an embarrassment and obviously they've come out of it okay on the other side. But I wonder if we might be entering that era for the Lakers. And it just, it could be interesting to sort of keep an eye on in the near future of what exactly goes on in that situation. But just thought that was all interesting stuff to touch on. Let's do this. It's 8:30. Let's take our last break. We'll come back. We'll get to some baseball. We'll talk about the Yankees a little bit. We'll do all that. We'll take it to about 9 o'clock, and then we'll wrap things up. 845-416-8704 is the number to get on. You got about half an hour at the most left, so don't wait. We'll be right back on the Split Decision on YouTube Live.
Super Bowl III provided the classic matchup of David and Goliath. The AFL underdog Jets versus the NFL seemingly unbeatable Colts.
But you got to understand that the whole NFL thing was riding on us. That these upstarts actually were going to play against us, and we were 15-1. The only game we had lost was to the Cleveland Browns. We had just played Cleveland in Cleveland, had beaten them 34-0 for the NFL title, and now we were going to finish up as the greatest team in history.
We never recognized the American Football League, never watched their games. I'd never seen Joe Namath throw a football until the warm-ups prior to that game. We didn't recognize him. That was just a semi-pro league that if you couldn't make it in the NFL, that's where you went.
Namath would be the central character of an incredible pregame drama in Miami. Ironically, Joe's coach, Weeb Ewbank, had gone to great lengths to avoid controversy. He wasn't entirely successful.
Well, the thing that I thought happened in Super Bowl III, that Weeb handled it great. He took us down there 3 days early, turned the players loose, no bed check. Then we started our week preparation for the team, and he brought the wives in. They roomed with their wives.
Well, there's one thing that Weeb Ewbank had drummed into our head. He says, whatever you do, don't open your mouth. Don't say anything that might incite these guys. Well, what does Namath do? He makes some remark that there were 5 quarterbacks in the AFL that were better than Earl Morrall. And, we're all saying, Joe, we have to block these people. You don't.
One fellow who took particular exception to Joe's criticism of Colt quarterback Morrall was Colt place kicker Lou Michaels.
The scuffle at the bar between Namath and Michaels. Joe was saying how they were going to kick the butts of the Colts, and Lou Michaels said not only were the Colts going to kick the Jets' butts, but he would personally that night do the same thing to Joe. And it ended up Joe being a smarter guy that he ended up buying around the drinks, and everybody ended up having a good time that night.
But just when matters finally appeared to quiet down, Namath dropped his ultimate bombshell.
He was at a banquet and where they honored him, and during a question and answer session where they asked him, what do you think about the game? Who's going to win? He said, well, we'll win, and I guarantee it. Well, I could have shot him because he upset everything that I had done.
But as it turned out, I think it really helped us because we all felt that way, but none of us wanted to come out and say it. Well, Joe was really the leader of that team, and he just says, hey, I'll get up and say it. He got up and blurted it out.
And when Joe came out and said he guaranteed the Jets were going to win, our people got angry. And I thought, boy, this is just what we need. We were practicing in Boca Raton, and I mean, we had quality football practices for that game. And Shula had to call off the dogs. We were beating each other to death.
We were favored by 19 points in that game. It was not even supposed to be a game. And we went in there knowing that these guys couldn't beat us. On their best day and our worst, they couldn't beat us. Well, turned out on our worst day and their best, they could beat us.
It certainly was the worst day ever for NFL Player of the Year, Earl Morrall. All season, Morrall had quarterbacked the Colts brilliantly. But January 12th, 1969 was to be his day of infamy. The Jets intercepted Morrall 3 times at the goal line, the most humiliating heist coming just before halftime.
All right, back here live on the Split Decision on YouTube Live here. It's a little after 8:30 on Monday, August the 17th, 2026. We will be off next week, back live on the 31st, and we will really start gearing up to get into the football season, the stretch run, and the baseball season, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk a little about the Yankees, who continue to play better than they really have any business playing, considering they can't score any runs. They were 3-3 this week. They played Seattle. They win 4-1. They win 10-5, and then they lose 1-0. So they did have a 10-run explosion, and give them credit for that. But Thursday they lose 1-0 Thursday afternoon. Then they go up to Toronto, and Friday they lose 3-1. Saturday they lose 4-1. So that's in 27 innings. They have 2 runs in 3 straight losses, and then yesterday they end up winning 4-3, but even that's misleading because going into the bottom of the 9th inning, they were up 2-1. So in 36 complete innings, they had scored 4 runs. And then they end up letting, and the bottom of the 9th in this game was infuriating yesterday as the Yankees are trying to stave off a sweep by an under 500 Blue Jay team. And Bednar's in. First batter reaches on an error by Rice. Then Bednar walks Kirk, so it's first and second. Then the runners move up on a wild pitch, so it's second and third. He gets a foul out, so it's second and third, 1 out. Sack Fly scores a run to tie the game. So they score a run on an error, a walk, a wild pitch, and a sacrifice fly. Then in the 10th, Rice does homer, so he makes up for it a little bit. Yankees go up 4-2, and they end up winning the game 4-3. So you give the Yankees a credit. They fight off the sweep. They end up with certainly not a week that anybody's gonna. It's not going to echo down in history through the annals of Yankee lore, but they avoided getting swept. So they finished the week 3-3. Now they go down to Baltimore for 3 games the next 3 days: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They are going to get Carlos Rodon back. So for the first time all year, they will have their 6 starters all healthy. The question will be whether Will Warren will stay in the rotation or not. Right now, they don't have anything listed all we know is Rodon will pitch Tuesday. They play Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So they play 6 days in a row. Not that that's many in baseball, and then they have an off day. I would not be surprised if they go with a 6-man rotation this time through, keep everybody else on their day, and then reevaluate at the end of the week. They also do have I know they have a doubleheader coming up on August 29th because I'm going to be at the first game. So it is possible that for the next few turns, they try to keep 6 starters. But the thing is, when you have a guy like Schlittler, who's a, Cy Young, is Fried back to the DL now? Great. So I guess that problem worked itself out. So Max Fried back to the DL, I guess. Let me see. I did not have that, so we will look. But obviously now that's Max Fried. Fried back on the IL with bone bruise in left elbow. Fried, okay. Potential elbow injury and potential. Oh, great. So Fried was back for a couple of turns through the rotation, and now he's on the IL. So it works itself out. They're going to stick with the 5 starters. Before I get to the big picture on the Yankees, I think here's what you want to look at when it comes to the Yankees from a standing or from a reality standpoint. They are at the moment the first wild card. They have a 9-game in the loss column lead on. You could almost say that if you could bring yourself to. They have a 9-game lead for the last wild card spot. Like the first team that's right now, the third wild card is Baltimore, who's 2 games over 500, 2 games under 500. So for the team that's the first team out of the playoffs is Texas, who's 3 games under. So the Yankees, with 38 games left to play, have a 9-game lead for the last wild card spot, like for a postseason spot. They're not going to fall out of the playoffs. I think the MLB thing here gives them this is ESPN, but gives them a 99.4% chance of making the playoffs. So I think it's pretty obvious that short of an all-time historic collapse, the Yankees will be going to the playoffs. It is unlikely they will catch Tampa Bay, although Tampa Bay has lost 3 in a row. So the Yankees have come back to them a little bit, where they are 6 games behind them. And I know they play them a decent amount, but I think realistically, most of the rest of this season. Now, again, I know there's time. And if you want to talk to me in a week or 2 and the Yankees have closed the gap to 2 games or something, I want to see how many more times they play Tampa. I know they play them the second to last series of the year. That's it. They play them 4 times, twice on the 22nd. Another game I will be at, make up from a game that was rained out in May. They only play 4 games left with Tampa. Assuming Tampa, assuming the wheels don't fall off, the Yankees are going to be most likely either the 4 seed or the 5 seed. Again, I know there's time they could catch Tampa. I don't see much evidence that they're going to go on some crazy hot streak to make up 6 games in 6 weeks or whatever it is. So, this whole rest of the season is it's not playing out the string, but I don't know how consequential it's going to be. I think you could argue that right now, the rest of the season for the Yankees, the way it's going to play out is going to determine just whether they get home field advantage in the wild card series against the Red Sox. Again, that's oversimplifying it a little bit, but I feel pretty comfortable that that's actually what the scenario is going to be. And interestingly enough, the Red Sox have, really cooled down. And I guess we should have known it was coming eventually, but after they beat the A's on August 7th, which was their, I don't even know what straight win, but they got to 64-51 after they beat the A's on August 7th. And that was like 33 of their last 37 games or some insane number. They then lost 5 games in a row to the A's and Toronto. Then they went win-loss, win-loss the last 4 games after that. So they lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've lost 7 out of 9 now to the A's, to Toronto, and to Pittsburgh. So not, real stunning competition. They've fallen 3 back of the Yankees. They're back to 8.5 out of first place, I believe. So, again, they were obviously going to come back down to earth at some point. I still think they'll be fine. They got Arizona, San Francisco, and Miami the next 3 series before 4 with the Yankees at the end of August. But certainly right now you wouldn't feel good about either of those teams catching. You wouldn't feel good about either of those teams catching the Rays, and you wouldn't feel good about anybody else catching either of those teams. And the Red Sox are currently up 5-0. So, we could see that sort of play out the rest of the season, is essentially just getting ready for a 3-game Yankees-Red Sox. And I understand it's still a quarter of the season left. It's still too early to do that, but it seems like that's where we're headed. From an injury standpoint, we mentioned Rodon, we mentioned Fried back to the IL, everybody else for the Yankees. Judge began playing catch on Friday. Gary Phillips of the New York Daily News reports. The thing with Judge is pretty soon there's not going to be any more minor league games. Unless, he ends up playing for like the AAA team if they're in the league championship series or whatever. But regular season minor league baseball usually ends Labor Day. So, a couple weeks left of that. I would imagine that Judge, my gut now is a month. My gut is they get him back for the last 2 weeks of the regular season. I don't know. That may be overly optimistic, but the fact that he's doing anything encourages me after months of doing nothing, that now he's doing things and playing catch. Obviously, the big test is going to be when he starts swinging a bat, and that doesn't seem to be imminent at the moment. So that's why I'm saying, I wouldn't expect to see Judge for the Yankees until there's maybe 12 games left in the season. I think that would be a good hope at this point. Get him some at-bats before the playoffs start, and it's a really small sample size, but I think that's on the optimistic end of things. And obviously we're at the point now where one setback probably wipes him out for the rest of the season, including the playoffs. Bellinger will begin a rehab assignment Thursday or Friday of this week. So good news there that maybe his stay on the IL will be a relatively minor one. Nothing new really on Stanton other than that phenomenal update that he is started the introduction to running some bases. So, once we get the base running thing out of the way for him, we should be smooth sailing from there. Because as long as they can bring Giancarlo Stanton in as a pinch runner in those late inning games in October, we should be all set. So, I think we remain in a holding pattern for the Yankees. The Yankees' upcoming schedule, we mentioned they go down to Baltimore for 3 games, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They come home for Toronto this weekend. Another long homestand. There'll be 3 at home against Toronto, 3 at home against Houston, and then 4 against Boston to take us into September. And then they'll have a West Coast road trip. And, you look at the schedule in September, and after they finish up with Boston on August 30th, they're going to play out in California, a dreadful Angels team, play a good Padres team who's in it. Then they come home for the Rockies, who are horrible, the Mets, who are horrible. They go play the Twins. They go play Arizona. And then the last week will be Tampa and Baltimore. So, obviously a lot of baseball to be played, but, you'd like to see that. If they're going to have any chance of winning the division, you feel like by the time we're on the air next week on August 31st, that number's got to be down around 3 games. And you'd like to see some of these hitters making a much more, being much closer to taking bats in the Bronx again. Let's say that. We talked about the AL East. Let's just do the standings real quick. Tampa Bay right now, 6 games up in the win column on the Yankees, 9 games up in the win column on Boston. The AL Central, the White Sox have, I don't want to say pulled away a little, but they have a 6-game lead on Detroit. They're the only team in the division that's over 500. 65-58. And I think we really need to give the White Sox a ton of credit because let me do the White Sox franchise index here. And 65-58 is not, it's certainly not good enough to be in first in most divisions, but it's also the AL West, the team the team in first place in the AL West is one game over 500. The White Sox could win in the high 80s of games. It's not like they're going to win that division with 79 wins. And when you look at, the White Sox the last few years, you go back to 2021, and I'm not going to count 2020, but 2021, they won 93 games. The year after that, they were 81-81. And then the last 3 years, 61-101, 41-121, and 60-102. And here they are, 65-58. And yeah, they're in a weak division, but 65-58 is a 528 win percentage. And flashing back to when I used to calculate their win percentage for how bad it was. Let's see. They're on pace for like an 86 win season, which again is not usually good enough to win a division, but there have been worse division winners than 86 and 76. So the White Sox, with a little breathing room, I guess the one downside is almost every other team except Kansas City is in the same neighborhood. Like Detroit, Minnesota, and Cleveland all are basically have the same record. So only takes one of them to get hot to maybe make the White Sox life difficult. In the West, we just talked about Houston with a 2-game lead. They're only 63-62. Texas 61-64, and even 59-66 Seattle is only 4 games out of first place in that division. Wild cards in the American League, we talked about the Yankees right now. They are first wild card, 55 losses, then Boston with 58. Then it gets real tight for the next bunch of teams. You got right now that third wild card would be Baltimore at 61-63. Texas is 61-64. Toronto is 61-65. Detroit 60-64. Minnesota 60-65. Cleveland 60-65. Seattle 59-66. So Seattle, who is in 12th in the American League, is only 2.5 games out of the last wild card spot. So really still the only 3 teams to cross out there: Kansas City, the A's, and the Angels. In the NL, the Phillies still, ways back from Atlanta, 8 games back. And then Miami, 3 games over 500. In the Central, the Cubs have cut into, or I guess no, they haven't. Cubs are 5 games back on Milwaukee, so still within striking distance. And then in the West, the Dodgers, who've really struggled as of late, and the Padres have surged. So the Padres actually find themselves only 7 games back of the Dodgers at the moment, which is a lot, but it's less than it's been most of the season. And Arizona only a game back of that. So right now, the wild card in the NL, the wild card picture in the National League, Cubs with a decent lead on the first wild card. Phillies and Padres both tied for the second and third wild card spots at 67 and 58. Then you have Arizona a game back, Miami and St. Louis each 3 games back, Pittsburgh, then you take a jump, but Pittsburgh 6.5 back, Washington 7.5 back, and even Cincinnati 7.5 back. So, and then the only teams I would say out of it that are double digits out, the Mets, San Francisco, and Colorado. So, still a lot to play. And if you're Cincinnati and you're 7.5 back and there's 8 teams in front of you, you don't feel real good about it, but distance-wise, you're still mathematically alive in it. Before we wrap up the baseball, I wanted to talk about the guy on the Cardinals who it was the first time it had ever happened in baseball history. Joshua Baez was called up from the minors, and he was the first player to hit 3 home runs in his first 3 at-bats in the major league. 23-year-old left fielder called up from AAA Memphis, hit the first pitch he saw into the Wrigley Field bleachers, then homered in his next 2 at-bats. He ended up with 3 home runs and 5 RBIs. Baez is the first St. Louis player to homer in the first career appearance since Lane Thomas in 2019. And he's the first player to do it. I don't even know how many guys have hit 3 home runs in their major league debut, but I'm guessing at least one other guy did, because they would have said he was the first player to hit 3 home runs in his first game. If he was, they said he was the first home player to hit 3 home runs in his first 3 at bats, which is, to do anything for the first time in baseball is insane. But to see a guy 3 home runs in his first 3 at bats, just really a phenomenal achievement, and we congratulate him. So I guess with that, we'll circle for a landing here. We got closer to 9 o'clock than we probably have in quite a while. Like I said, I like having a bunch of different stuff to talk about. And tonight we got into a bunch of different stuff, and the Kawhi Leonard thing and the Jackson Dart thing and all that, so I enjoyed having different topics, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't really looking forward to a couple of weeks from now when the first hour of the show is about football. Obviously things will change as we get to the baseball playoffs, and depending on what the Yankees do. And then obviously when the Knicks come back and the NBA comes back, things will be, things will be a little different in that regard. But, these summer shows, there's a lot to talk about, but there's not a lot to talk about sometimes. And, it's sometimes not tonight, but sometimes it feels like a bit of a slog. So I'm looking forward to
when you book your SoCal stay with Verbo, peace of mind comes built in. Download the app and book now.
We will wrap things up for the night as soon as this ad finishes playing. I want to thank my brother and Dana for the comments on the instant feedback, and all of my small but loyal group of regular listeners. I've done about 4 hours, a little more than 4 hours broadcasting / podcasting in the last 24.5 hours. Voice can use a break, computer can use a break. We will be back 2 weeks from tonight, Monday, October the 31st. Not October 31st. Monday, August 31st at 7 o'clock. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Have 2 weeks. And we will see you 2 weeks from tonight, Monday the 31st.